Hey everyone, welcome to the Orange and Black Insider. I am Anthony Cosenza, and welcome to the live broadcast if you were, and thank you for your patience if you are joining the live broadcast. We had a couple of little issues and whatnot getting started, so thanks for being patient and still tuning in and joining us. We greatly appreciate it. We have a pretty cool show coming up. We've got James Rapien of ESPN Cincinnati and the Bengals Locked On podcast. He's going to join us in about 5 to 10 minutes. So we'll be talking to him about Bengals training camp. We have another guest set as well. We're trying to work with him and get him on. His name's Mark Powell, and he recently wrote a really cool book, an ebook about the Bengals. So we're hoping to get him on as well shortly after we talk with James. But we're here. Training camp has started. We're now about a week in. There's been a lot of positives, some scary things that happened on Thursday. We'll get to more of that in just a little bit. Let's kick it off though, Scott, with an article you posted on cincyjungle.com based on some research. And, as you look around the league right now, there's a lot of injury scares. Not only, the Bengals, knock on wood, have largely been able to avoid some of those, especially that we've seen, in years past. But you look at Joe Flacco, there's some news about Ryan Tannehill and some other players around the league, and injuries are a part of football. And you came across some interesting research done by, I believe it was a set of doctors, or I'll let you explain, but really noting the CTE issue and head injury issue that's been plaguing the NFL. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and some of the findings in that?
Okay, and yeah, like you said, we should probably rename this the Black and Blue because of all not just the concussions, but also the issues we have with our technology. And
I gotta say, you champed it, buddy. You were having some internet. I'm sure it has to do with the weather or whatever out in Ohio, but because I know that can sometimes knock out some internet. But you champed it and you got on here. We're trying to work through some different things, but appreciate it. Go ahead though.
Yeah, and there was and whenever you mention CTE or concussions, it always seems to get an audience, and there's several reasons for that. I mean, you look at some of the very prominent names who have come out with issues based on the CTE, such as Hall of Famer Junior Seau, who committed suicide, Joe Van Belcher of the Kansas City Chiefs, who ended up killing himself in front of the Chiefs coaches at the facility. And it's a very big name issue. There was even a movie on it with Will Smith portraying Dr. Bennett Omalu, who had done a paper, and at first the NFL kind of denied it and was kind of ignoring it. And now, so there's that distrust with the NFL, because now they're kind of saying, oh, okay, maybe there is a connection between banging your head and your head having long-term injuries. So anyway, there was a group of doctors, as you mentioned. They released a report recently in the American Journal of American, I forget the exact, the Journal of the AMA, American Medical Association. And anyway, the journal, basically the headline that everyone took from there was something like 99% of NFL players were found to have CTE, which is a pretty scary headline. It's definitely clickbait because, you see that, you're like, wow, this is a dangerous sport. You see people like, Patrick Willis and others who have stepped down early because of the scare. I think several players have this. I think Eugene Monroe might have recently retired, and a couple others after this report came out and the headlines came out. And one thing is very interesting that I just wanted to kind of cover when I did that article on Cincy Jungle, and just want to mention briefly, is that as damning as that headline is, it really doesn't accurately reflect what that report said. And it's just amazing how this report said one thing over here, and I don't know if it's to hype up a story, whatever it was, what everyone heard was something totally different. And what's interesting is that the report, the studies did find that I think it was like 114 of 115 players who were former NFL, or 110 out of 111 were found to have CTE when they were studied. The problem is it's not as conclusive. Like, there's nothing really they could conclude from that report. And several of the reasons are, in this study, they were looking at brains. CTE has to be determined after you're dead. They have to do an autopsy. Right. And the way they got the brains to do the study was in what they call these brain banks, where people have donated brains after people died. generally the only brains that are going to brain banks are people who are suspected of having CTE, who are, hey, this guy died, he committed suicide, he had some, mental degradation, things happened. We're going to donate this so you can study it. The guys who die who were healthy generally don't have their brains in there. So first off, the report is only looking at a set number of people. So it's kind of like looking at, looking for, I just mentioned the article, looking for sand on the beach or priests in the Vatican. Obviously, you're going to find them. There's a much higher rate of finding them in that particular genre, that area they're looking for. And then you have some of the other issues where you had smaller numbers in the kids that were studied who had played up to high school and up to college. But the problem was, it's a degenerative disease. So if you die younger, you're not going to have as much time for it to develop. So it doesn't really, conclude, okay, is this an issue because these guys played longer and got the NFL and got the, tar knocked out of them? Or is it because they developed at an earlier age and just had more time for the condition to develop before they were studied? So there's a lot of misleading things in there. There were several, and I'm just going to cut it short because I think our next guest has joined us. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to you, Anthony, and maybe we'll touch on that a little more later.
Yeah, we can. Obviously, it's a very hot button topic in the NFL, and a lot of people talk about the long-term viability of the league because of all the head injuries that are happening around the league. And what was really interesting in that finding was how certain positions are affected more so than others. And I thought that was kind of an interesting finding all around. And it's alarming. I have a young son, and I obviously want him to play some sports, and football would be one of them. And obviously you kind of hear and see some of this stuff, and it's not. It makes you pause a little bit when it comes time for those.
Yeah, it's definitely not where the numbers are really high, but the numbers don't give you any. You can't conclude anything from the numbers, and I think that was the biggest misleading thing. Was the media was trying to conclude things from those numbers, which the report, and even in the conclusions, the doctors even said, it just shows this may lead to that, and there was nothing. They couldn't conclude anything. There were too many variables that were not controlled in the study to really show. But to your point, yeah, I mean, I have a young son, and he loves football as much as you can as a 3-year-old, but do I want him doing that, when he's 5 and 10, banging his head, until he's 30 or 40?
Right. Yeah. Interesting stuff. And I'm glad you wrote about that, and we can talk about that a little more. But as I mentioned at the top of the show, we do have a special guest. I believe he's with us, and hopefully he can hear us. James, awesome. Yeah, I got you. James Rapien with ESPN Cincinnati and the Locked On Bengals podcast, another great podcast. And we are so excited to have you with us. We've had a number of good guests over the course of this show, and it's been way too long since we've asked you to be on the show, but we appreciate the time, James. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
Good. I guess today and you were out there at practice at training camp. I saw you had a post practice video that you put up on Twitter and other platforms. But I guess we've already got questions in our live YouTube chat about it. The hot topic, at least for today and right now, is Joe Mixon. Not only how he's been playing in training camp, but he had a little injury. I've been hearing bruised heel. I've been hearing probably minor. Do you have any updates on that?
What I saw, because he kind of tweaked it initially, and it was one of those things where you're like, oh, he's limping a little, and he just walked to the side, and then he got back right. It got in there a couple plays later, and I was like, oh, okay. And then you didn't see him again. And then that's when people started to think, uh-oh, and you started to see the Twitter reports. But, yeah, it seemed pretty minor. I mean, when he went back in, he ran a pass route, and he looked every bit as explosive, and he cut on it, planted. So I think it was just a precautionary thing because the Bengals know what they have in Joe Mixon. Probably a Rookie of the Year candidate. I know it's really early, but he's been great in camp, and I think they just wanted to take it easy on him.
So speaking of that, I'm probably going to steal my co-host thunder on this one. But he has been, at least, I mean, a number of players have been kind of the talk of camp so far, but he has been quite a bit of the talk of camp, I guess, because not only of his talent, his history, but also how he's looked in the practices. Would you say he is one of the most impressive players you've seen so far while you've been in person at camp?
Absolutely. I think he's as great as Gio was and is, and the fact that he was able to recover from that ACL and he's out there doing things that we didn't expect to see this early. Joe Mixon's the best running back they have. I mean, he's the power that he runs with, you could just tell he's bigger than Jeremy Hill and he runs faster than Gio. And he cuts and he makes people miss. And when you're as big as he is and you're making people miss and you run as strong as he does, he's just a special, special back. You can tell the talent is there. Will the offensive line be there? I'm not sure. I know Joe Mixon, he's going to be a good football player.
Okay, and James, the offensive line was something you mentioned. I think at least something me and Anthony have talked about in the past, that seems to be where the offense is probably going to succeed or fail. I mean, obviously the skilled players seem to be there. Dalton's still there. Eifert hopefully is healthy. I guess one of the big questions would be from what you've seen, the tackles. Is Ogbuehi, and does he look like he made, some level be able to replace Whitworth? And does Fisher look like he's going to be the right tackle? Because we've also heard about Andre Smith going out there, and there's even talk of Trey Hopkins starting. So I guess for someone who's been there, what I guess have you seen as far as the tackles go?
I would say it's Ogbuehi and Fisher's job to lose either way. So they're going to give them every opportunity to succeed. Fisher put on some weight in the offseason. I think he looks the part. It's really hard. It's really early to tell. They've only worn full pads a couple days. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I hear Cedric Ogbuehi worked out with Jay Glazer. Toughness was a thing for him last year. He just wasn't tough. And if you ask people around him, that's what they'll say. So does MMA training help you get tougher when you're more physical? I mean, maybe not. But I think it comes down to, and I've said it multiple times on ESPN 1530 here in Cincinnati, Paul Alexander is expected to develop these guys, and he's supposed to be this great offensive line coach. So this is one of those times where you have a first-round pick and a second-round pick. They don't need them to be stars. They need them to be serviceable players, and we'll see if they can get it done.
Yeah, I totally agree. Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to mention you said Paul Alexander. So I want to bring up a popular whipping boy on our podcast, which is Russell Bodine, now in a contract year. Is he looking any better?
I mean, I will say this. It's funny you mentioned him because last year he was probably their worst offensive lineman coming into the year. I mean, this time last year it was, what are they going to do at center? This year he's their second best offensive lineman going into camp behind Russell Bodine, I would say. Or behind Clint Bowling, rather. So, yeah, it's one of those things where I think they know how to use him now. They're not going to put him in position to fail like they might have done in the past just because they're familiar with him, his strengths and weaknesses. So he's not going to be great this year, but I think he'll be serviceable. And that's what they need from the offensive line, like I said, with Ogbuehi and Fisher.
Yeah, I think if you get, average to above average from this group that is expected to be one of the worst, I guess, going into this season. If you get that out of them this year, I think a lot of fans would take that. Now, James, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but
go for it.
You have you've been a little bit more openly critical of Andy Dalton than maybe some others, and I do find myself agreeing with quite a lot of what you say with Andy Dalton. Great on Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern against the Clevelands and the teams you're supposed to beat, but the prime time and all of the issues. Now you see this year with the new talent, the young talent, do you think that even though he's shown improvement in a lot of critical areas the past 2 years, do you think that now John Ross, Joe Mixon, all of these new guys, do you think that the bar internally has raised for Andy Dalton in terms of expectations? And is he, I don't want to say on the hot seat, but are they kind of now saying, look, we've given you all of these guys. Excuses are starting to run thin. What do you think?
I think that they like Andy Dalton and they want Andy Dalton to be their quarterback. And unless there's some crazy prospect that they feel like is better, that they won't draft that guy. So Andy Dalton is going to be their quarterback, whether I like it or not. And I think he's a good quarterback. He's good off the field. He's average to me. He doesn't do anything great, but he's good. He's good in the locker room. He's good as far as at the line of scrimmage, audibling and all that stuff. He doesn't wow you physically. But as far as these weapons, yeah, Andy Dalton's 29. I don't know if he's had – in fact, I'll say that. He's not had the talent that he has this year around him.
Yeah.
He might have had close to it. I mean, you like that 2015 team. They couldn't run the ball. I mean, and they had a good offensive line, but Jeremy Hill was struggling that year, and Giovanni Bernard was in and out. So with Joe Mixon added, with a John Ross, potentially he could be your second wide receiver or your fourth wide receiver. Who knows where he ends up? I mean, there's depth all over. I was talking to CJ Uzama earlier today. He was like, yeah, man, you look at this depth chart. He was like, we're 3-4 deep at running back and tight end. It's 7 deep at receiver. And he's just laughing, and you can tell that the players feel like this could be a special offense. And part of that is because Andy Dalton's a veteran quarterback, 29 years old, in his prime. And he did play. He has played really well. Even last year, I think he played well for most of the season. He was bad in the Washington game. That was the game I was really critical of him. But carried them in week 1 against the Jets, even though he got sacked 7 times. And he didn't have anyone to throw to the second half of the season. Brandon LaFell was his go-to guy. Now LaFell could be in that 3rd receiver mix, 4th receiver mix. So he's going to have plenty of weapons. This offense, even with the line, I expect big things from him.
Sorry, there's something you mentioned, the offense, and there's one question the me and Anthony mentioned before, and I'm hoping maybe you have a better answer than we do. Jeff Driscoll versus AJ McCarron. I assume McCarron's a number 2, Driscoll's a number 3. Haven't seen them play. Does Driscoll look like he's comparable? I mean, is there any reason to keep him on the roster?
I think it's interesting because I'm not sure the Bengals last year when they picked up Driscoll, I thought that maybe they were preparing for life without A.J. McCarron. And then the market kind of settled and it cooled off for McCarron. Because a year ago and some change, there were definitely it was a year ago when Sam Bradford went to Minnesota. I'm sure that the Vikings called the Bengals about A.J. McCarron. So the Bengals are probably thinking in the future, kept Jeff Driscoll on the roster to develop him. I've watched him this camp. So far, he looks pretty good. From those that I've talked to within the organization, they think he's really athletic, which he is. He can run really fast. I think he ran a 4.6, 4.7 40 at the combine. I might be wrong on that, so don't quote me. I'm just going off of memory there. But I think Jeff Driscoll, could he be a serviceable backup? Sure. But if you move A.J. McCarron, I'm just throwing it out there. I know it's been thrown around on Twitter today. Then you're in the same boat as a lot of these teams, like a Miami, where if your starting quarterback goes down, you're looking at the free agent market wondering who's there. So I think the Bengals are really comfortable having A.J. McCarron as the backup. I think he's locked into that spot unless something crazy happened where they get blown away by a trade offer.
It's just very interesting. If you look at the roster depth and how they always preach versatility, like they like the guys who can do multiple things, special teams. I'm thinking, also like the guy they drafted from Houston this year, who seems to be a returner / safety. Do you think they'd keep 3 quarterbacks again?
Yeah, and I did a bad job of answering your question. As far as Driscoll goes, it'll be interesting because they're 7 deep at wide receiver, and they're deep at cornerback. So do they keep an extra wide receiver and try to sneak Driscoll onto the practice squad? Do they do that? I think they might consider it, because who's more important to your success, Alex Erickson or Jeff Driscoll? Alex Erickson probably is, and it's because he's going to touch the ball every game on punt and kick returns. So now if he's not your best returner, if you decide, oh, well, we're going to put someone else at returning, maybe Joe Mixon returns kickoffs and John Ross returns punts, then maybe Alex Erickson is expendable. But at this point, I think they would consider moving on from Jeff Driscoll, but we do know that the Bengals like familiarity, so especially at the quarterback position. So as of now, I would assume he makes it, but we'll see.
And we've spent all this time on offense. I do want to throw one defensive question at you, kind of the man crush of, I guess, the preseason or OTAs, Carl Lawson. just looked awesome. And all the videos we saw, with no pads on, with shorts and T-shirt, just running around guys. Now that they're actually going in pads, now that Ogbuehi is supposedly, as you mentioned, tougher, hopefully has that core strength that was kind of his knock when he was drafted. Is Carl Lawson still looking like that third down pass rusher around the edge that everyone kind of hoped he was during the offseason?
It's funny because Marvin mentioned him in his press conference today about how he's going to unleash Lawson at some point. and it's interesting because Marvin never talks like that, but he did, and he seems really high on Carl Lawson. And Rocky Boyman, who played in the league for 8 years, he hosts on 700 WLW. He came to practice today, and he walks up and he says, "Hey, have you seen Carl Lawson?" And I'm like, man, he noticed right away. And usually when someone who's played on defense for that long in the NFL, I just shut up and listen. So I'm buying into the hype, to the Carl Lawson hype, because everyone I've talked to believes in him. I know he worked out with Willie Anderson a lot, both being Auburn guys. So we'll see, but it looks like the future's pretty bright for the fourth-round pick.
Talking with James Rapien of ESPN Cincinnati and the Locked On Bengals podcast. Thanks again for joining us tonight, James. Appreciate it. Sticking on the defensive side of the ball, the Bengals were without two of likely their best picks of the 2016 draft, all of last year, in Andrew Billings and William Jackson, even though Billings was, a mid-round pick. But how have those two looked? I know William Jackson had an interception. I think it was on the first day of camp of Andy Dalton. Kind of heard some things about Billings, but how have those two looked, especially now that they're back, they're healthy, we're seeing a little bit more of them?
William Jackson III was probably the most excited person I had seen for a training camp because rookies are kind of leery and they're kind of trying to get through the playbook. He's not a rookie, and the veterans are usually like slugging through like, oh, here we go, another training camp. But William Jackson just wanted to play. So he was really excited, really confident. He's made some plays, too. He had an interception on, I think it was the first day of camp, that he returned for a touchdown. He's gotten beat deep. I will say that speed has gotten him a couple times. Josh Malone got him a couple times. I think part of that, and I was talking to our friend Joe Goodberry, and he said part of it's probably just not being able to be physical at the line of scrimmage as much. And that makes sense for William Jackson, who's long arm, tall, strong. And there's no doubt he could run because he ran a 4.37, I think, at the combine or something like that. So William Jackson, he's not going to be expected to contribute a ton, I don't think, on this team, partially because of how much depth they have at corner. But he'll compete probably with Darqueze Dennard for that fourth spot. And we'll see if Josh Shaw is the nickel. If they keep having injuries at safety, I think they'll move Josh Shaw to safety because he's certainly versatile enough to do that. And that would open it up for Dennard to play that nickel spot. But right now, I think William Jackson III, it's a rich person's problem or rich people problems to have him coming off the bench essentially as the fourth or fifth corner. As far as Andrew Billings, I think he's going to play a bigger role. And he's probably battling for a starting job. I think he should probably start. He's really confident, fully healthy. He said he was fully healthy right after the season in late January. He finished his rehab. So I expect big things from him. He's all systems go, and I think he's going to be a big difference just because of the difference in athleticism from an older Domata Peko to Andrew Billings now getting those snaps.
James, in our live YouTube chat, we got a question from one of our listeners that they wanted to ask you. And when we have guests on, we like to have them interact with you. He writes, I think it's he, because it's Mr. Sinister is the person's name. So, James, who of the defensive rookies, and in parentheses, you can include William Jackson III and Billings if you would like, do you think will have the biggest impact? So you just talked about Jackson, you talked about Billings, you talked about Lawson. Obviously, there's Jordan Willis in there, maybe even a Jordan Evans. I mean, there's some guys to choose from there. Who do you think of that group?
I would say Andrew Billings, thinking about it, because Carl Lawson will be used in situations, situationally, I think. But Billings is going to be out there, probably get the most snaps, be relied upon a lot to stop the run. He'll be in there first and second down, I would say for sure. maybe they'll move someone else there for third down on pass rushing downs. But if you're telling me Lawson Billings, who's going to have the biggest impact, I lean Billings partially because how much he's going to play, but I'm high on both. I think both are going to really give this defensive line a boost, and both are really going to help each other because Lawson's going to be coming around the edge and Billings right up the middle. I think it's a great problem or a great thing that the Bengals have with two young guys to kind of bolster the pass rush that they've needed for quite some time.
There's one thing I just wanted to kind of add in. It's very nice to finally have an Ohio majority on this podcast. Anthony's out in California. Our old second host we had was in California, so it's finally nice to have two Ohio guys. And I have heard you on 1530, so it's nice to kind of have a Cincinnati, Ohio dominant.
Awesome.
So that being said,
I'm jealous of the weather, though, Anthony.
I know. Well, it is what it is,
And everything's been very positive, which obviously is good to hear, this time of the year when we're undefeated. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but I've argued on this podcast before. I think they're better all around than the team 2 years ago. They went 12-4 and it was 10-2 before Dalton. If you look at the depth at wide receiver, the defensive line, the improvements at line, except for maybe offensive line, but running back, across the board, they seem to be a better unit. So what would you project for this 2017 team?
I expect playoffs. I think that should be the bar. I think it should be the bar for Marvin. I think it should be the bar for Andy. Because here's the bottom line. Look at the AFC. How many competent – let's just say you're not high on Marvin. You just think he's an okay coach. How many okay coaches with franchise quarterbacks are there in the AFC? Not that many. I mean, Ryan Tannehill, everyone's talking about Ryan Tannehill. Andy Dalton's better than Ryan Tannehill. So I look at this team and all the weapons that are around Andy Dalton. And even with the offensive line issues, the defense was pretty good last year because Vontaze Burfict carried them. He's in shape, flying around. He looks better this year than he did last year. I think he's poised for a huge season. So this team should – I mean, let's just think about it. Geno Atkins, Vontaze Burfict, Andy Dalton, A.J. Green. There's a bunch of these guys in their prime. Carlos Dunlap, plus a mixture of young guys, a mixture of veterans that could also help. I think this team should win 10 games. I mean, they're better at kicker, which last year was an issue. So 10 games, maybe more, depending on John Ross's health, depending on the offensive line. If the offensive line bombs, because there's not a lot of depth past the guys that we're hoping are okay. So that's another question mark for the offensive line. But I think playoffs are a reasonable expectation for a team that has this many players in their prime and has as much talent as the Bengals do.
I think we're all in agreement with you there. Obviously health is the key there. And if that's kind of what, even though they struggled throughout the first part of the season last year, obviously the injury bug and all kinds of stuff hit them at critical spots. So I think if they can avoid that, I don't see how that projection couldn't come true. James, before we get you out of here, where can they find where can Bengals fans follow you, get your material, get your podcast? Obviously, we talked about that you're on ESPN Cincinnati, the radio station there. But how can fans get in touch with you? ESPN1530.com/James, 700WLW.com/James. I'm on the iHeartRadio app, all my podcasts, interviews. So during training camp, I'm going to be interviewing a bunch of Bengals. I already have. It'll all be up on the iHeartRadio app if you just search James Rapien. You mentioned the Locked On Bengals podcast. It's a daily podcast. That's on iHeartRadio, Audio Boom, iTunes. So plenty of ways to find me on Twitter at James Rapien. And I'm open to emails, tweets, anything like that. If you have questions, I try to answer them all. Awesome. Well, appreciate the time. I know you're a busy guy. We'd love to have you on again sometime soon if you're able.
Absolutely. Anytime. This wasn't any problem at all. So you just let me know.
All right. Appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
That was James Rapien with ESPN Cincinnati Radio, the Locked On Bengals podcast, and a great guy. And I think, actually, if I think back, I think James dabbled with Cincy Jungle a while ago, early in his kind of sports sports writing, sports casting career. So it's been he's a great guy, a lot of good insight, and we were happy to have him on. And I think we are joined by our other guest of the evening, Mark Powell, who has written a really interesting ebook. Legends of the Jungle is the book. Mark, can you hear us? How are you?
I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about the issues early on, but I'm glad we got it worked out. And
it's ain't technology great.
Well, before we kind of dive into the book, because I downloaded it. Thank you. It's really cool, really interesting. It's very well written. I really like the bridge. I like the bridge of a tone of Bengals fan / professional writing. I thought it was really entertaining to read. But for Bengals fans who maybe haven't checked out your book and don't know your background, maybe give a little background on who you are, why you wrote this book, and maybe what made you become a Bengals fan.
Well, I became a Bengals fan because of default. I was born and raised in Louisville, and back in the early 70s, you only had one game a week on Sunday afternoons, and the Bengals were the Louisville local market. Then the family moved here in 75, and my dad became a season ticket holder in 83 or 84, and then once he moved, I took him over. So that's been the case. But I got the idea behind the book is what I wrote in the introduction. Was watching the 2014 playoffs. Week before, we had been eliminated by the Colts because we didn't have anybody to play. Everybody was hurt. And during one of the commercial breaks, they showed the New England Patriots Hall of Fame. And I'm like, well. And then the next game was the Seattle Seahawks. They showed their Hall of Fame. And I'm like, they came in the league after us. So that spurred it on. And one thing led to another. Finally decided, okay, if I'm passionate about this, then put up or shut up. So I started putting paper to pen and doing all the research. And after about a year and a half, it finally came to fruition.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think, this is a really cool book that you put together, because I think this is really echoing and channeling a lot of Bengals fans' thoughts and really, I mean, they desire this type of thing, this type of honoring system by the team for their past players. I think what they did this offseason in talking about the top 50, the top 50 historical players and whatnot was a good step in that direction. But it is a shame that they don't do more, and maybe that'll change down the road. But before we kind of talk a little bit more of the intricacies of your book, did you have a look at how the voting played out for the Bengals top 50? And if so, we talked about this on a couple of episodes ago. My co-host Scott Schultze and I did. Maybe talk about some snubs, some surprises, some of those people that made the list that you think was kind of like, wow, either, I didn't think they deserved to make it, or they were higher than I thought, lower than I thought.
Right. I took a look at it pretty extensively, and a lot of people who have bought the book came and then immediately came to me and go, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? So I've taken a look at it pretty hard. I think it's a pretty good list. If I gave it a grade, I'd give it a B. But I looked at it, and I had 6 people that I thought that they missed and 6 people I would have taken out.
Okay. And
the 6 I thought they should have included were Chip Myers, James Francis, Bobby Williams, Darnay Scott, Tony McGee, and Vern Holland. And then the 6 I would have taken out, Greg Cook. I really don't understand that one. I really don't.
My co-host is laughing because he had a qualm with that one too, right, Scott?
I mean, yeah, that was my biggest complaint.
If you're gonna put somebody in that played 12 games, then put in Klingler. I mean, I had an issue with that. I had an issue with the Coy Bacon one. I just didn't think he played here long enough. I mean, it was only 2 seasons. They were very good seasons. I get that, but I just was not a big fan of that many years. I think Pelfrey, we already got a kicker and a punter in the 50. You don't need any more than one kicker, one punter. And then I didn't agree with Stanford Jennings, Eric Thomas, and Solomon Wilcott. So if I was going to add those 6, then obviously I had to take 6 out, and those were the 6 I would have taken out.
Now, just for the sake of let's talk about your book here again. The book this is Mark Powell, the author of Legends of the Jungle, and he talks about it's introducing the initial candidates for a possible Bengals Hall of Fame. Really entertaining read. It's via ebook, so if you're not the guy that goes to Barnes and Noble and wants to go buy a paperback, you can do it digitally. Now, talk about how long this kind of process took. I mean, the amount of research you put in it. There are names on there. I mean, I'm in my mid 30s, and there were names on there. I see Leo Barker. I'm going, oh my gosh, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
The one that gets the most is Howard Fest.
Okay,
like, who is he? But like I said, it started in the winter of 2014, and what I did was I looked at all of the NFL teams who came into the league in and around the same time as the Bengals did, and those who had a Hall of Fame. I took out coaches and announcers. I didn't want to go down that road. I just wanted to go straight with players. And so I took a look at all the players they had in their Halls of Fame and essentially averaged out how long each of them were with that franchise. And when you put it all together, the average tenure that these individuals had was 8 years. So that was my first, if you want to say, cut line, was that they had to be with the Bengals for 8 seasons. And in those 8 seasons, they had to be a primary starter 6 of those 8 seasons. So I wasn't going to put Brad St. Louis in as the long snapper, even though he was been there more than eight seasons. And so that's where I got made the initial cut, came down with the list that I've got now, and then just started doing all the research. And there's a lot out there. And again, trying to find a little bit of a nugget or a theme for each player. For instance, with Vernon Holland being the sharp dressed man, that he wore the suit and brought a briefcase to work every day. So anything that I could make a little buy-in for each character, that's kind of how I put it all together. And that's where I came up with the list of who's included. I would probably say, in retrospect, I probably wish I could have put Corey Dillon and Darnay Scott in it. They were 7 seasons, so they just missed the cut. But as much as I'd like to make an exception, I stuck to my guns and said you had to be here 8 seasons, and they unfortunately didn't make the cut.
Question I have, you mentioned, and it obviously was a lot of work, as you mentioned, starting a few years ago, doing all the research, doing all the writing, putting everything together, finally getting this book done. And I assume that's just part of the work, because then it's a matter of, okay, I've got this thing written, but I just have it here. How do I get it out? Can you maybe walk through the process of, obviously, like trying to find a publisher versus deciding to self-publish? And I know there's literary agents versus, I'm sure there was a lot of effort in trying to figure out how am I actually going to get this, creation of mine out to the public.
Yeah, I did a lot of research. I thought about doing it when you say self-publishing on my own, and I looked at what I'd put enough work into it at that point. I didn't want to have to do any more. So I did a little bit more researching and phone calls, and found this company, iUniverse, that just so happened to be associated where my alma mater of Indiana University, and they put everything together, and they obviously look it over. They provide the editing, you get to design the book cover, the whole bit. And from that point on, they do some marketing. And then I obviously did some self-marketing myself. But from that standpoint, I've made business cards. It's pounding the pavement saying, hey, buy my book. Anytime you run into somebody, I always carry a stack of business cards with me. And if I see somebody in a Bengals hat or shirt, I give them the business cards and go, here, buy this book. This is where you can get it at. So I'll be honest with you, the writing part of it was maybe the easiest part.
Okay.
To be honest with you, because it was 90 to 120 days after I had completed the final draft that it finally was in book form.
And since you have gone through all this trouble of making this book, and you have seen the first 50, and you mentioned a few of the changes you would make, the 6 guys you would add, the 6 you'd take out. Mm-hmm. There were a few pet peeves I guess I had on the list, and so I'm just kind of curious what your thought is. I may just be over the top, might be a bit crazy. You mentioned Greg Cook, so I'll skip that one. That was one of my biggest beefs. And you mentioned the kick. I guess this one's like a kicker in general question. For me, Shane Graham, not off the list, and Pelfrey on it, and Jim Breach 5th overall. I'll lump those as one. Okay.
I don't agree with Breach 5th overall.
Okay. I assume too high? Not
yes.
Too low? Okay.
No. Way too high. In fact, I don't even have Breach in the top 10. Now, in fact, if to go to that with the top 10, I would take Breach out, and I would take David Fulcher out, and I would add Ken Riley and Bob Johnson into the top 10. I'd keep Breach in the top. I'd keep Breach in the top 20. I wouldn't keep Fulcher in the top 20. I'll be real honest with you. That's just again my personal opinion. But I'm with if you're absolutely desiring to have another kicker on that list, which I don't think you need, then yes, I agree 100% with you. I would put Shane Graham over Doug Pelfrey. But my opinion is you got one kicker and one punter in the top 50. If it's like an NFL roster, hardly anybody carries more than 2 kickers around anymore, so I don't think the list needs any more than 2 kickers.
When there's I have to agree. I was very surprised Breach was that high. And a guy who's never made a Pro Bowl, never made an All-Pro, to say he's your 5th best overall player. Just
right. I mean, and again, I get the fact that he's still the all-time leading scorer, and he was in both Super Bowls, and there's probably a chance had they somehow or another won that Super Bowl 23, he could have been the MVP. I get it. But, I think one of the things that I would be interested in seeing with this list is that it was 50% fan vote and 50% media vote. And I would like to see what that breakdown was. Who were the media's top 50 and who were the fans' top 50? And I think, for instance, Stanford Jennings, my opinion solely is he's on this list because of the kickoff return in the Super Bowl. Great moment, maybe one of the top 5 moments in Bengals history. But does that make him a top 50 player? When you look at his stats, I don't think it does.
There's one last question I want to throw at you. Some guys who are on the list, but I guess in my opinion, maybe they had the rankings flipped. So I guess I'll see which one you would consider the worst error or whatever.
Transgression.
Yeah. And the first one, so the one, I guess the first one that kind of struck me as odd was Max Montoya ranked ahead of Willie Anderson. And the other one was Ickey Woods, who really only had 1 year of any production, ahead of Pete Johnson. And granted, some voters may not know who Pete Johnson is, but those were the 2 that just kind of struck me, that where I agree they can all be on the list, but just the order just seemed off.
Right. I agree with you 100%. I certainly would put Willie Anderson ahead of Max Montoya, and certainly put Pete Johnson ahead of Ickey Woods. And Pete Johnson is another one of those players that missed that 8-season cutoff, and really was, would have made a pretty good case of being in that Ring of Honor. I agree with you 100%. I'll add one more that I just don't get, and that's how you put Dave Lapham ahead of Bob Johnson.
Yeah, that was the one I had a problem with. Yeah.
God love Dave on the broadcast, and it's fun for him to listen to, and he's very insightful as an analyst. But there is no way, and I think he'll tell you himself there's no way he should be ranked ahead of Bob Johnson. But yeah, yours with Willie Anderson over Montoya, 100% agree, and certainly agree with the Pete Johnson over Ickey Woods. In fact, Ickey Woods probably would be my number 50. I mean, I think he's on that borderline. I think you could make a case. Another couple people. You could put like Reggie Kelly, maybe even over Ickey Woods, because you did the research and you found out that those players on that team that he was on with the 2005 through 2009, they claim he was the glue to that locker room. And I don't think that can be dismissed when you're putting together who the great players are. So 100% agree with you.
Yeah, and there are other players, you know, that you look at, you go, especially in that early Marvin era when he turned things around. You look at Eric Steinbach, you look at a guy, Levi Jones, who really became an alternate Pro Bowl alternate type of caliber of player. Again, we're talking with Mark Powell, who is the author of Legends of the Jungle, introducing the initial candidates for a possible Bengals Hall of Fame. Really cool read. And it's not, you know, it's very cool, very well done, very well researched. It's, you know, it's not somebody just putting pen to paper. There's 300 pages of awesome stuff, a lot of high quality research. I want to get your thoughts though, Mark, on before we get you out of here. I want to get your thoughts on some of those players in the 1990s. You mentioned some of them. You mentioned Darnay Scott. You mentioned a couple, and I thought Darnay Scott was a pretty good football player. I mean, yeah, he was a little bit of a one-trick pony at times, but you know, he was a productive player in a very, very poor era. You mentioned James Francis, kind of the same thing. How much do you think to just that losing decade, that decade of just you know, awful football? How much do you think? How much do you think that really weighed on, whether it's the fan vote, the media vote, what have you? How much do you think that really hurt some of those really good players, the Tony McGee's, the Darnay Scotts, you know, a lot of others that were pretty good players for this team that seemed to be, I mean, heck, even Carl Pickens was like in the early 20s, the mid 20s. And I think he was.
Carl Pickens was actually 26th.
That was criminal to me. I thought that was.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So
I think your point is spot on. I think that there was, in my opinion, a real travesty done to the players that played during that era. And I think that they got graded, for lack of a better word, based upon the record the team had. You know, with the exception of a couple years in the mid 90s when with Blake and Pickens and Scott, where, you know, it was miserable football. There's just no other way of spinning it. And I think that really did damage. And I think certainly from the fans' perspective, that's why I kind of said earlier, I'd be curious to see what the media vote was. And did they have some of these guys from that era in their top 50? There were some really good football players. And just, unfortunately, there were few of them and not enough good players during that time frame. You know, we talked about Gray Cook, and if they want another quarterback, my goodness, why not Jeff Blake?
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't here long, but he's certainly here longer than Gray Cook.
Yep.
And but I agree with you 100%. I think they were done a disservice. That's my personal opinion. I agree. And when you do the research like I did, yeah, and again, I write in my book, you can't dismiss the fact they were horrible, because they were as a team, but you can't dismiss the contributions that several of these players made, like a James Francis, like a Tony McGee, and particularly like a Carl Pickens. And I think the other thing that hurts Pickens in that list from the fans is the fans didn't like him.
Right.
And you know, and I think that really hurt his voting value, if you will.
Yeah, and I think the same could be said probably with Corey Dillon, both a victim of being in those late 90s, early 2000s teams that didn't win games, and then obviously he was kind of an outspoken guy against the team. Mark, this has been awesome. I'm glad we made this work. I am too. I
split it out, but I got it done.
Hey, like I said, and I'm not just blowing smoke here, and I wouldn't have had you on the show if I didn't enjoy and really respect what you put together with your work here. Now, how can fans who are listening to this show and whether they're live tonight or downloading the show later on, how can they get this book? Where is it available and all of that good stuff?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the kind words on the book. It's really appreciated.
Absolutely.
And if anybody's want everybody to buy it that's listening tonight, you can go to iuniverse.com, go to their online bookstore. You can purchase it there, or you can go to barnesandnoble.com and even amazon.com. All three venues have it. They can follow me on Jungle Legends on Twitter, And if they're in the Cincinnati neighborhood and they tweet me and want their book signed, if they buy it, I'll be more than happy to drive to meet them wherever they want me to meet them, and I will sign their copy.
Awesome. Well, that's it's good stuff, and appreciate you making time to come on. And for those of you listening, go check out his book. It's again, Legends of the Jungle by Mark Powell. Really cool stuff. And for those of you maybe on the younger end of the Bengals fan spectrum, you're going to learn a lot of cool stuff and hear a lot of names you may not be familiar with, but will be once you read this book. So thanks again, Mark. Appreciate you coming back on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it and really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Do the same.
All right. Scott, you've got all kinds of stuff going on there, buddy. You've got another guest, it looks like. Is it your little guy?
Yeah, we are full of guests. So, yeah, we are full of guests today. We had a radio. We had a author who wrote about the Bengals first 50, and now we have one of our younger Bengals fans.
That's right. That's right. Well, now you've had a chance to at least glance at his book, right?
Not yet.
Okay. It's very cool. I wasn't just blowing smoke. It's very cool and very well put together, I think. And I'm glad he was able to join us. We were having a little trouble getting him on early, but I'm glad he was able to join us. And for all of you again, go check out his book. It's cool. It's cool. I think you'll enjoy it. You'll learn some things, and you'll find that it's well written for kind of a fan piece, if you will. And that's why we had him on. Before we get out of here, there's a couple little questions in the YouTube chat. We're kind of running short on time. Again, I wanted to thank James Rapien of ESPN Cincinnati and the Locked On Bengals podcast. So if you're tuning into this podcast, you should also listen to James's podcast. And also Mark Powell, again, the author of Legends of the Jungle, talking about a potential Bengals Hall of Fame with that. There was a quick question here, Scott, and correct me if I'm wrong. Royal Flush 513 says, when is the final day to cut the roster to 53? I think what has happened is now with some of the offseason rule changes, they now do final cuts all the way through the preseason. So I think it's right before, I think it's a week before the season. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's usually sometime after the fourth preseason game. I think it used to be a day or two after that weekend. I don't know the exact date for this calendar year, but to your point, that is right. That I think now they actually have cut down the number of they kind of stagger it. I think it goes from 90 down to, I think it was 70 or something like that, and then they stagger it down to 53. And some teams will do that. Some teams will actually cut them piecemeal, kind of as they know, yeah, this guy. Some teams like the Bengals tend to have more of a tendency to just wait and then chop everyone at the end. And I think the more merciful thing, if there's such a way of cutting someone, is probably to do it piecemeal, because that way it gives the guys more time to latch on somewhere else. So I do like the fact that they did that. That if they realize, yeah, this guy just not going to make the team, it's great to give them a chance a little sooner.
So I found the date. It's actually, it appears to be September 2nd. And this is on operations.nfl.com for those who are wondering. Prior to 4 p.m. New York time, clubs must reduce rosters to a maximum of 53 players on the active-inactive list. And then that's also when they need to start designating people on the, PUP or IR, all that kind of stuff as well. It looks like, same day as well. And then obviously what happens after that, as we all know, as players get cut and all of that, there are teams that kind of scour the waiver wire and do all of that. Obviously, we've got another question. What is going on with Michael Johnson? Have you had a chance to look at an update? I know he practiced Thursday. Have you heard much on Michael Johnson, Scott?
The most I can tell is he's hurt, but it doesn't seem to be serious. The fact he's a starting veteran, it doesn't concern me at all, because I think teams these days, with injuries and how much they're paying the guys and wanting them on the field, it's very common for them to, sit the veterans if there's, and even if in preseason, if there's any sort of tweak or anything, you'll see a guy, sit for a week or more that in the regular season would probably be out there. And it's just a very precautionary thing. It just looks like that. This guy's a veteran. He really doesn't need a whole lot of practice. We know what we're getting from him. Being out there grinding in the heat when he's kind of tweaked isn't really going to improve anything. So we're just going to keep him on the sideline. When they probably get closer to preseason game number 3, that's when they'll probably start ramping him up slowly, get him out there for a series or two. And then even as Mark was saying, if they're looking at putting Lawson in a whole bunch to replace him, he really doesn't need to be playing that much, because for the role he has is that, that solid run stopper on the right side. He's not someone that you really, that's something he's been doing for years. It's something he can do. And it just looks to be more of a precautionary thing, kind of like with Iloka. I think they said 3 to 4 weeks with him, and I think that's a similar thing. If we were in like week 10, I don't think it'd be 3 or 4 weeks. I think it'd be a week, maybe 2. But, he's a veteran. He's experienced as a starter. There's no reason to be rushing him back either.
Yeah, and I don't want to say it wasn't serious because he missed a full week of training camp practices, but he's returning to practice. He returned to practice for Thursday, and I think he's good to go ahead. Obviously some fans are a little sour on him because of a lack of his showing on the stat sheet. But personally speaking, I think he brings a little more than the stat sheet, and I guess that's kind of the Robert Gathers argument, unfortunately. But I do think he brings more than just the stat sheet, and I do think he is a guy that you want to hang on at least for this year, bridge that gap with some of those young guys. Scott, we'll get out of here in just a moment. We had a question. I believe it was so. There's some talk in the chat room about Cedric Pierman being cut, and obviously, you bring in Joe Mixon. They're going to keep Jeremy Hill. They're going to keep Gio Bernard, and those are 3 second-round draft picks on running backs, and then they bring back Pierman, who has been a special teams guy, a spot fill-in guy, mostly in the early years of Andy Dalton's career. So hasn't really had significant carries, but a guy that has made the Pro Bowl as a special teamer. The question that was posed, interestingly enough, was who would be the special teams captain, or who would be the guy that you would look at on the special teams unit and say, this is our guy? Because now you're potentially looking at a rookie kicker, right? You've got you've got maybe some draft picks over the past couple of years who are a little bit lower on the depth chart, whether it's cornerback, wide receiver, what have you, that are doing gunning duties and that sort of thing. And Pierman is a very good special teams player. Who do you look at that point?
I think for me, granted, I don't get a vote on this.
Right.
There are some democracies that are a little smaller than others. This is one apparently the Constitution doesn't give me a vote in. That being said, I would guess someone like Vinny Ray, because if you're looking at Minter and Perfect as your starters, and there's a lot of talk about, they're a team that tends to run nickel more often than other teams, so they may only be using 2 at times. And then also Nick Vigil is someone they seem to be high on. So I'm thinking those are your top 2 or 3 in some order, which means that Vinny Ray is probably on the outside looking. He's probably your 4th linebacker, which means he's probably going to get a lot more time on special teams, kind of where he'd, I guess, cut his teeth, as you would say, before he became a starter. So he's someone I could see, the experienced guy, the veteran, the leader, a guy who's been dependable, a guy who has played on defense as well as special teams. So I just pulling a name out, he's the one that seems the most likely to me.
That's a great call. I'm going to cop out here, Scott, because I don't know, but I'm going to agree with James Napke in our live YouTube chat. And simply put, Cedric Pierman won't be cut. And I don't see it. They've got some other undrafted rookie running backs and things, exciting guys like that on the roster. But if Marvin Lewis, he favors his guys, and he's always been a guy that, hey, if you're going to make this team, either you're an outstanding skill position player that, you know, we can't live without, or you're going to be a guy that can do some things on special teams, whether it's coverage, punt coverage, kick coverage. He values guys that do that, and Pierman does a lot of that dirty work. As I mentioned, made a Pro Bowl. I don't see him going anywhere, and if he does, they better find someone that can do some special teams work nearly as well as he has been able to do with the Bengals over his career. Scott, this has been a fun episode, man. Maybe it's been especially fun because the workload was a little bit off of us. It was on other people to answer questions and provide the insight. But like I say, for those that are just tuning in live or missed the early portions, we had James Rapien of ESPN Cincinnati on the program and the Locked On Bengals podcast. We had Mark Powell, author of Legends of the Jungle, a really cool book about, talking about who should be in a potential Bengals Hall of Fame. Really cool stuff. I had a lot of fun, Scott. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. And we had it was also kind of cool that Ohio dominated 4-1. I think he's from Ohio. I know Mark Rapien.
He said Louisville, I think, is where he's.
Although I thought he said moved to Cincinnati.
Okay, maybe he did. Okay.
So my son jumped on briefly after his bath. Yep. So so it was kind of nice that, hey, this Ohio team, let's get. Now that being said, I did love the post tweet they had a year ago, kind of where people clicked on where they were from on the world just to see how global Bengal fandom is and international. So it is. I mean, Israel. I think it opened a lot of people's eyes that, hey, this is more than just a regional team. There's a lot of fans, in Ireland and the UK and Europe and California and all sorts of places. So it was a lot of fun having some guests on, and I'm kind of secretly hoping now. There's some people who are injured. Maybe Michael Johnson, Georgia Loka. If you want to work on getting them on next week, Joe Mixon.
They might have some time off. You're right. And again, for those, there's a lot of people worried about Joe Mixon. It sounds like it's a minor thing. And if you listen to James earlier in the program, it sounds like a minor foot/ankle injury. Shouldn't be a big deal. Sounds pretty precautionary, which is fine. I do love the segue you provided for me, though, talking about where Bengals fans are, where listeners of this program are. We got a comment close to a week ago from Ethan Cullenbell on one of our videos saying, "Hi guys, love your content. I'm from the UK and have no ties to Cincinnati, yet somehow I ended up supporting them and I do not regret it. I love this team." So really cool, not only that Ethan tunes into this show, but is also a Bengals fan from the UK. Super cool. And Ethan, we appreciate your tuning into this program, downloading the program, and hopefully you continue to do so. Usually I plug this multiple times throughout the show, and I haven't been able to because we've had a jam-packed show with guests and analysis and all kinds of stuff. But you can get this show on CincyJungle.com. We splice it up sometimes into posts, as well as the entire program that's on CincyJungle.com. We're on iTunes. We are on SoundCloud. You can get our stuff all over the place. You can get in touch with the show on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. You can also get our content at YouTube as you guys tune in live every week. If you are able to tune in live, we usually record Wednesdays. Unfortunately, schedules kind of changed. So this is a weekly show. So we kind of mixed it up this week. And unfortunately, we've kind of backed up against the Hall of Fame game. But for those of you tuning in live and watching this program live, tuning in live while that game is going on, we greatly appreciate it. Again, download our content if you can. We appreciate the support. Scott, I think you have something else you wanted to mention. Was it a question in the YouTube chat?
Yeah, there was more question. I just wanted to throw an answer out. I'll be very, very fast. Vape Guy asked how crucial Eifert will be this year. I think it's going to be super crucial, partially because if Oboyehi and Fisher can't block, we have to have a tight end in there who can actually help block, kind of like Gresham did his first season. And he is still our red zone guy. We saw what happened last year when he was out. As awesome as Green is, they don't use him enough in the red zone. John Ross is more of a deep guy than a red zone guy. You look at the roster, we have some guys who can catch down there, but no one like him. The way he gets separation from safeties, the way he works in the red zone. You look at all those touchdowns Dalton had 2 years ago, and a ton of them were to Tyler Eifert, and a ton of them were in the red zone. And once they get down there, I don't want to, once they get into the 20, I don't want to see Jake Elliott attempting field goals. I want to see touchdowns, and I think he's going to be very crucial for them to continue doing that.
Yeah, and someone else in the YouTube chat earlier talked to, I think it was when James was on the show, someone else was pointing out the fact that the Bengals need to be better on third down, need to be better on red zone opportunities, which they were deplorable at. So, I mean, it was a total collapse. The Bengals on offense in the red zone couldn't necessarily punch it into the end zone, and then all of a sudden you have Mike Nugent come out there and he doesn't always make all the kicks. So then all of a sudden what seems like a golden opportunity to catch back up, take a lead, whatever the case may be, it slips through your fingers because you can't punch it into the end zone, and then your field goal kicker can't convert. So hopefully the Bengals have made the right moves to remedy that situation. And Vape Guy is a gentleman, John, who I've known for a while through Cincy Jungle and other shows and whatnot. So it's good to hear from him. And I'm glad he kind of pulled back the mask and revealed his identity from Vape Guy. But at any rate, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Scott, do you have any additional thoughts before we cut out here?
No, just I thought it was a good show. I'm glad everyone listened, and hopefully we'll have another great one next week. And we're getting closer to preseason, so we'll have something on the field to talk about, which would be a nice change.
Yeah, that's right. And it was good hearing from people that are smarter than I am this week. And I mean, I hear from you every week, Scott. So you're obviously smarter than I am. So. But I'm talking about other people as well that are more intelligent than I am. But hope you all enjoyed the program. Hope those of you who are downloading the program enjoy the interviews we had. Again, we're on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, Cincy Jungle. You can get in touch with the program on Twitter and email. We want to hear back from you. Thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. Thanks to James Rapien of ESPN Cincinnati and the Bengals Locked On podcast, as well as Mark Powell, the author of Legends of the Jungle. Great time talking to them, and we will see you next episode. Appreciate it. This has been the Orange and Black Insider. For Scott Schulte, I'm Anthony Cosenza. We'll talk to you soon.